Hi everyone, and welcome to our second case study of the year, whole genome sequencing, a first tier and comprehensive genetic test. In today's webinar, we have Ms. Kriti Menon, Centogene's Senior Genetic Counselor. She completed her undergraduate degree in genetic engineering and postgraduate degree in psychological counseling. Kriti is also certified by the Board of Genetic Counseling in India. During the webinar, she will provide an overview of whole genome sequencing, literature-based evidence, its advantages and limitations, and the relevance of research variants and real evaluation. At the end of the webinar, she will share different clinical case studies and lessons learned. If you have any question, you can submit them on the Q&A box that you'll find on the below bar. And at the end of the presentation, we will answer them. Many thanks, Kriti, for joining us in this case study. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody for joining for today's webinar. So today we would be discussing on whole genome sequencing and how whole genome sequencing can be used as a first-tier genetic testing and is more powerful than most of the technique that we have till date. So today, during the presentation, we would be discussing with an introduction on whole genome sequencing, its advantages and limitations, followed by some literature-based evidences on whole genome sequencing, and few of the clinical cases that we've seen at Centogene and the lessons we have learned from it, and to end with a summary on whole genome sequencing. So as we all know that rare diseases are actually not as rare as we think it is or by the name it is. Reason being that around 350 million people, which is around 5% of the population, is affected with rare disorders. Till date, around 6,000 to 7,000 rare disorders are identified and been reported throughout the literature, of which around 80% of the rare disorders are hereditary in nature, and most of these rare disorders are seen in the pediatric or children age group. And the bitter truth is that around 30% of the children does not even survive till their fifth birthday. So then why is it called a rare disorder? Then if it's so common, why is it called a rare disorder? So one of the reason could be that the journey from genetic testing and genetic diagnosis for these patients are not very easy, or not not like a very straight line. So generally it starts from going to multiple primary healthcare professionals, then few specialists, which is compiled to about around 8 clinicians. Then it is followed by 2 to 3 misdiagnoses and n number of genetic testing, and even takes up to 5 to 8 years before the patient or the family actually can get a genetic diagnosis. So now, what are the genetic testing options that's available for the patients and for the clinicians for now, and based on the clinical picture? So as we know that we generally categorize and recruit the patients for various genetic testing based on the clinical picture of the patient. Majorly, if the clinical picture is very clear, or when it's we can conclude what is the genetic diagnosis and the differential diagnosis of the patient, then we use a different strategy from the patients whose clinical picture are very atypical, or when it's more complex, or conditions like autism or intellectual disability. So to start with, if the clinical picture of the patient is very clear, then we would go ahead with shortlisting what is the genetic diagnosis and the list of differential diagnosis. Based on this, we would order a single gene genetic testing, such as triplet repeat expansion or methylation analysis, or maybe a NGS panel, which is mostly looking into a set of genes responsible for a particular set of conditions. If this turns out to be negative, then we go ahead and do a higher end test, such as whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing or microarray, where all 20 or 22,000 genes are looked at, and various intronic exonic regions are looked at, to have an understanding that we are not missing out or we are giving the genetic diagnosis at the appropriate way. So this is mostly taken, these tests are mostly taken into consideration when the clinical picture is more complex. And also to understand that not just the tier 1 genes, but also the tier 2 or the research genes are also taken into consideration when we do or perform high-end tests such as whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing. So moving forward to today's topic, which is whole genome sequencing, and when do we order it, or why do we order it, and how can we order it? So the question is, what is covered in centogenome or whole genome sequencing? So generally, the data set that is generated from the whole genome sequencing comprises of data around 90 to 120 GB when it's compared to whole exome sequencing, which is only around 8 to 9 GB of data. So here, the data that is generated is huge, majorly because all the intronic regions are covered and all the other regions or regulatory regions are covered very well. Average genome size would be around 3.2 billion base pairs. Genome covers all the coding and non-coding regions of about 22,000 genes, including exonic, intronic, and regulatory region. And also we can detect anything from a single nucleotide variant, insertion deletions, copy number variations, structural aberrations such as translocation, and also nuclear and mitochondrial genome could be covered using centogenome. Now, the advantage of using a centogenome over the whole exome sequencing would be majorly to look at the deep intronic variants, which generally we say that, or the literature is stating that around 15% of the rare disorders are caused to the variants which is present in the intronic or regulatory regions, so which could be evaluated or which could be ruled out using a centogenome. And apart from that, all the chromosomal rearrangements, large deletion duplication starting from the intron and exonic region could also be well covered using the centogenome. The technical limitation of whole genome sequencing would be that we cannot pick up triplet repeat expansion as triplet repeat expansion analysis, or the disease could not be ruled out using a centogenome or any whole genome sequencing. Also, methylation and epigenetic changes are currently not evaluated using whole genome sequencing. Centogenome is generally covers around about 99% of the genome at a target base pair of more than 10x, and the mean depth would be about 30x. The sample type that we require is generally one centocard, and the turnaround time is about 20 working days or less than 20 working days. So now the question is, when do you offer a centogenome, or when do you recommend a centogenome to for your patients? So this is clearly depending on the one would be on the phenotype. So if there is a heterogeneous phenotype or a atypical clinical picture, or when you suspect a dual diagnosis or a blended clinical representation, then you can always offer centogenome as a first tier genetic testing. The other reason would be when you are looking for anything from a deep intronic variant to something like a microdeletion duplication syndrome or a mitochondrial disease, then centogenome could be offered to the patient. And the most common criteria that we see is when the patient or the clinician has already performed a whole exome sequencing and it turns out to be negative, or maybe n number of genetic testing has already been done and all the genetic testing turns out to be inconclusive, and that is when they order a centogenome or a whole genome sequencing. So generally, whole genome sequencing is best offered for patients who have been having a genetic diagnosis and a number of differential diagnoses to be taken into consideration, and to put an end towards the long genetic odyssey. So whole genome sequencing can be offered not just in solo, but also in combination with duo, trio, or trio plus. So when do you offer a solo, and how do you when do you offer a solo or a trio? So that's the next question. So generally, this is based on, again, the clinical picture and the family history and the test that has been previously ordered for the patient. So if it's, so for example, if it's a patient with a clear genetic diagnosis, but all the previous genetic testing is negative. Or maybe for conditions where there's a severe presentation of neonatal or childhood in the childhood period, where there's an immediate need for the diagnosis, a genetic diagnosis, so that we can administrate the treatment course for the patient. Also for conditions like ophthalmological diseases, where there is the high incidence of deep intronic variants is associated. So for these categories, a whole genome sequencing solo is very much recommended. Whereas for conditions like seizures, autism, and intellectual disability or developmental delay, which is more complex and where more genetic knowledge is to be implemented, and if it'll be better if we have a segregation analysis performed for this particular categories, and also to evaluate for research variants, then it is best we order a whole genome sequencing or a centogenome duo, trio, or trio plus. So now moving on to the second category of our presentation, which is the literature-based evidence on whole genome sequencing and uh, the clinical cases that we've seen at Centogene. So these are few studies on the topic whole genome sequencing, which was performed worldwide by different study groups and others. So this is the first case that we would be discussing, or the first article that we would be discussing. So here, the authors Stavropoulos in 2016, what they did is they tried to understand the superiority of whole genome sequencing over chromosomal microarray or the other panel testing that is available in the market. So in this study, the team recruited around 100 pediatric cases with various clinical picture. The first step done was a clinical assessment, and a list of phenotype or the HPO terms were derived. This was done so that we could have it at the end for the clinical correlation, or the correlation with the genotype, phenotype correlation. And meanwhile, parallelly, all the 100 individuals, or all the 100 patients were recruited for genetic testing, that is whole genome sequencing, chromosomal microarray, and targeted genetic testing. So here, as you can see that in this flowchart, what is covered under each of these techniques. So a targeted sequencing generally, targeted genetic testing generally picks up all the single nucleotide variants, whereas chromosomal microarray picks up all the copy number variations, and whole genome sequencing can cover both single nucleotide and copy number variation, also insertion deletions. So in this case, all the 100 individuals were parallelly recruited for all three genetic testing, and we would look at the result in the upcoming slides. So the first part of the study was to derive the clinical picture or the HPO terms of the patients. So the author and the team could find out that there's around 453 unique HPO terms in the study cohort, and most of the patients, or maybe 57 percentage of the individuals, had a term which was associated with developmental delay, which is a common clinical feature that we see in most of our uh, genetic patients or rare disease patients too. And the other phenotypes were ranging from associated with nervous system disorders, or say skeletal system disorders, growth, eyes, cardiovascular, and neuromuscular conditions. So when the study group was evaluated, and the genetic test report was correlated with the phenotype, it was found out that the yield of genetic testing, or yield of each genetic testing for the patient group, was found to be as follows. So the targeted genetic testing in 100 individuals, out of 100, around 13% of the individual, which means 13 individuals had a conclusive result using a targeted genetic testing. Whereas using a chromosomal microarray, around 8% of the individuals were benefited, and we could identify that 8% of the individuals had some form of large copy number variations. Whereas when the whole genome sequencing was performed in all the 100 individuals, it was clear that around 34% of the or 34 individuals or pediatric cases had a conclusive result. So we can see here that this 13 plus 8, 21 percentage with an additional 13 percentage or 13 individuals also benefited with a whole genome sequencing. So which means around one third of the total study group had a conclusive result using whole genome sequencing. So this shows clearly how whole genome sequencing can pick up anything a targeted sequencing or a chromosomal microarray could be very well picked up, and also additional information could be provided for better clinical diagnosis or genetic diagnosis. So the study basically concluded, and the team suggested that mostly what happens is when a patient is recruited for or suspected to have a genetic disease or a genetic diagnosis has to be made, the patient undergoes around 2 or 3 various genetic testing, anything from a chromosomal microarray plus a targeted gene sequencing or maybe an NGS panel, anything like that, before they come to a conclusion or before they end up in a genetic diagnosis. Whereas if the patient directly goes ahead with whole genome sequencing, the chances of genetic diagnosis is much higher at the first place itself, which would bring down the cost and the time taken to the journey of genetic diagnosis. And it was also stated that definitely whole genome sequencing can be more advantageous for patients who have a developmental delay or congenital abnormalities. So this is one of the cases that we have seen at Centogene, where Centogenome is definitely having a much more uh, advantage over the other NGS panel or other genetic testing that's available. So in this case, the patient was a 4-year-old female baby, which was first born to non-consanguineous couple. No significant family history was noted. At day 4, the baby was found to have IUGR and abnormality of the eye. The test ordered by the clinician was CENTO-DX, which is clinical exome sequencing. Mostly looking at around 6,500 clinically relevant genes. So when CENTO-DX was ordered, the result turned out to be that a likely pathogenic variant was identified in the COL6A3 gene, which was related to COL6A3 related muscular dystrophies. So here, as you can see that the identified variant does not completely match with the clinical picture, but the child is only 4 day old. So, on the way along as the child developed, there is a possibility more clinical picture will come up and it could be taken into consideration, and the diagnosis could be more relevant. So the recommendations provided were to have a retrospective clinical evaluation of the child, parental carrier testing. Parental carrier testing was recommended, and also additional genetic testing such as a whole genome sequencing or a panel focusing at the ocular phenotype was also recommended. So now in this case, as you can see, at the day 4, or maybe in the first month of the birth, the child had a genetic diagnosis. So now is the other question is the genotype that is given matching with the phenotype? If yes, further genetic testing is required or not? Is the genetic diagnosis completed? And any other or any further genetic testing is required or recommended as per the recommendation? So if yes, why? So in this case, what happened is, down the lane, as the child grew, which was around 9 months old, the child and the family went back to the clinician, and the clinician could note down that the child has been having more clinical pictures than that was noted in the first time when the clinician had met the baby. So at 9th month, the baby was noted to have a failure to thrive, developmental delay, severe pulmonary hypertension, spasticity of all the limbs, bilateral small kidney, coronal atresia, and MRI abnormalities, also along with the previous clinical pictures such as abnormality of the eye. So here, as we can see that from the day 4 to 9th month, the baby has developed, and also more clinical picture was developed or manifested, over the around 8 to 9 months. So as we can see that definitely more clinical picture would help us to better understand and correlate the genotype phenotype of for this patient. So at ninth month, the clinician ordered a centogenome, including mitochondrial analysis for this patient, which helped us to understand that there was more variance which was taken into had to be taken into consideration or played for this child's various clinical picture. So there was a large deletion which was found in chromosome 3p arm, around 7.2 MB deletion, which comprises of 35 different genes. This was a pathogenic variant we could identify using an NGS CNB analysis, which was also confirmed using a Cento Array 750K. Apart from this, the previously reported variant in COL6A3 gene was confirmed. And also, additionally, one more variant was identified in POM1 gene, which was in heterozygous state, class 3 variant, which was associated with cerebrospinal ataxia type 47. So from this case, we can, we have learned, or it's very clear how genetic information or how clinical picture and genetic information plays important role in how it will help in a better genotype phenotype correlation. We cannot come to a conclusion of genetic diagnosis for any patient with partial genetic information nor with, incomplete clinical picture. So we require both. A complete clinical picture of the patient is required, which means maximum HPO terms is required. And this has to be very much correlated with a complete genetic data set of the patient. And only then we can conclude or come to a best possible genetic diagnosis for this patient. And the second highlight is that a patient, from their end, they should be always coming ahead for the follow up, or should be informing their geneticist or physician any if and when there is a new clinical picture that they note in their child, or uh, or anything that is developed, or anything that over the period of time, if the child develops any clinical picture, that has to be informed to the clinician, so that that to be taken into consideration the next time we do a reevaluation or a high-end genetic testing like whole genome sequencing. And also, this study also helps us to understand the significance of copy number variations, which has to be taken into consideration for rare disorders and for the cases where genetic diagnosis is left incomplete or inconclusive. And here, there's another advantage that by doing a whole genome sequencing, we can also have, there's a scope of reevaluation for specifically for the variant that we identified in the PUM1 gene. So now moving forward to the next literature-based evidence, which is how is whole genome sequencing having its advantage over the other techniques, which the other most powerful technique as whole exome sequencing. So this study was performed in 2014 by Gleason and team, where they have recruited around 1,489 patients, and they performed a microarray for all these 1,489 patients. So what they could identify is that around 12% of the individual out of 1,489 has benefited from microarray, which means they have had a conclusive result. But around 88% of the individual, which is around 1,310 individuals, could not benefit from microarray. So what they did is, from this negative or inconclusive result lot, which is around 88% of the individuals, they pulled out around 100 random cases, and they performed a whole exome sequencing for them. So when this whole exome sequencing was performed for the individuals with negative results in chromosomal microarray, they could identify that there's an additional 27% of the individual who benefited from whole exome sequencing. And this could be, majorly because single nucleotide variants are ruled out using whole exome sequencing. And there's also few insertion deletions could be picked up and ruled out. So now 27% of the individual benefited out of 100, and again another 73% of the individual did not. So what they did is they again shortlisted around 50 individuals from this negative lot, or the from the individuals who did not benefit from both microarray and whole exome sequencing, and they performed a whole genome sequencing. So when this whole genome sequencing was done for these individuals who had a negative result in the previous genetic test that was performed, it was identified that around 42% of the individuals benefited from whole genome sequencing, which is about half of the individuals have benefited from whole genome sequencing. So now when you see these pie charts, it's very clear that if whole genome sequencing was implemented in all the 1,489 patients, the rate at which, or the diagnostic yield which would have been much higher than that of array or a whole exome sequencing, and also the individuals, whatever the variants that we've identified using a microarray and a whole exome sequencing, can also be covered using a whole genome sequencing. So now we move forward to the next case study, and this signifies, or this shows us the importance of reevaluation, reclassification, and also the advantage of whole genome over the whole exome sequencing. So this was a case where the first child was presented with developmental delay and seizures and died at the age of 6 months. A whole exome sequencing trio was performed for the first child and the parents, which was turned out to be negative, or no clinically relevant variant was identified at that point of time. Later, the second child at the age of 2.5 months were tested for further genetic testing, and the clinical picture was as follows. The second child was noted to have antenatal abnormalities such as increased NT and polyhydramnios. There was feeding difficulties at birth for this child. And also the proband also manifested the same condition that as of the previous elder sibling or the previous child, which is seizure and developmental delay, and also hypoplasia of the toe. Apart from these features, various facial dysmorphism also noted for the proband. Various investigations done ranging from radiographs, MRI, and a nerve conduction study, and EEG showed various abnormalities which were taken into consideration while doing a phenotype genotype correlation. So the test ordered for the proband was now Cento Genome Solo. This was performed in 2018. So here, as you can see that, both the children have similar clinical picture, which is seizures and developmental delay. And it was also noted that this has developed at a very young age, or early onset of the condition was also noted. But the downside was that whole exome sequencing turned out to be negative, and a whole genome sequencing in the second child also turned out to be was found to be negative. And this report was released in September 2018 with no clinically relevant variant identified using a whole genome sequencing. But what happened is, later in July 2020, we released an additional report where we reported a homozygous likely pathogenic variant in PIGB gene, which was associated with early infantile encephalopathy type AT. So why was the second report released? Why was an additional report released? And why was this variant not picked up in the first child? So the reason being that the first child we performed a whole exome sequencing, and the variant that we found in the PIGB1 is a deep intronic variant which could not be picked up using uh, whole exome sequencing. And the second reason is that when we reperformed the bioinformatic analysis for this patient, we realized that this variant, which is variant in the PIGB gene, was found to be associated with the particular early encephalopathy condition. But when we did the analysis in September 2018, this variant in the literature was not associated with this condition. This was based on the new update in the OMIM. The new genotype phenotype correlation was released in 2020, but not in 2018. So as we know that from this case, it was very clear that over the time how the genetic knowledge has grown and how we could give a genetic diagnosis for a patient whom we were not able to conclude, or give a best possible genetic diagnosis at that point of time. So definitely, yes, the genetic knowledge is very fast growing, and the information and new genes, new variants are coming update day by day, and the better phenotype genotype correlations come up every day, and the and also various institutions, or various institutions worldwide, when they do the analysis and when they find a variant or a gene that is associated with the condition, they report it, and then we have always a scope of re-evaluation and reclassification when we do high-end genetic testing such as whole genome or whole exome sequencing for our patients. So in this case, although the whole genome sequencing was performed initially, which yielded a negative result, but later, with the help of reevaluation of the genetic data and with new information that came up based on for the gene and the disease, a positive outcome was yielded for this patient. So now moving forward to the third case study for the day, which is majorly focusing on the relevance of a research gene or a tier 2 gene, and how you can order for a additional research report with with each order that you place with Sendogene. So this is a case of a 11-year-old female first born to non-consanguineous couple. Various clinical pictures such as global developmental delay, hypotonia, autistic behavior, behavioral abnormalities, and cognitive impairment. Also, intellectual disability was noted in this child. Apart from that, seizures and EEG abnormality was uh, noted in this child. Also, various dysmorphic features of the faces was evaluated for this 11-year-old female child. So in this case, there was a family history that was also noted, which was that the paternal uncle was found to have a low IQ and mild autistic feature, but no medical records were available. So this case was very interesting because the family has underwent multiple genetic testing, and there's a whole large record of genetic testing that's been done, or routine test that was done. And here what was found is that an MRI brain abnormality was noted, which was thinning of corpus callosum. And apart from that, various genetic testing were found to be inconclusive, such as microarray, clinical exome sequencing, focused exome, which included copy number variations, and mitochondrial genome analysis. So from this case, it's clear that there's some sort of genetic association is there, but then there was no positive outcome, and there was multiple genetic testing, but yet no positive outcome was was found. So now there was a need for a high-end testing and to see if there was what was causing all these various clinical symptom in this patient. Thus, a whole genome sequencing, or a centrogenome trio, was ordered for this patient. And interestingly, what we found is there was no clinically relevant variant that we could find, or a tier 1 gene, or a variant that we could find based on the described phenotype for this patient. There was no homozygous variant in the TUMPD1 gene, which was predicted to affect the protein function, which was classified as class 2P. The homozygosity in the parents were also confirmed using the parental segregation analysis. But the fact is that the genotype phenotype association in humans were not strongly established till date, and this was categorized under tier 2 genes, or the research genes, with very minimal evidences provided in the OMIM. And now the only evidence that we could provide was that there was one article which was published in 2018, that a variant in TUMPD1 gene was reported in homozygous state for a proband with intellectual disability and dysmorphic facies, which both these clinical picture was also found in our proband. So now, if and when we have more evidence, probably we can, we have a scope of reclassification of this variant and having a better genetic diagnosis, or a conclusive genetic diagnosis for this patient. So now the question is, what is a research variant? So basically, a research variant is anything that is a tier 2 variant, and uh, it's basically to identify novel genes and novel variants at no additional cost. When can you order it? By ordering a centogenome or a centoexome in a combination with solo, duo, trio, or trio plus. So tier 2 genes are basically research genes which are which has no or minimal evidence in OMIM, and no prenatal diagnosis could be offered for tier 2 genes, and very less literature evidence are present till date, in the scientific literature world. That's what we call as or categorize as tier 2 genes. But the advantage is that over the time, when we have more information, we can always categorize tier 2 gene to a tier 1 gene. If you wish to opt in for the additional research report, you can always tick in for the additional research report under the reporting session of our test request form. Or if you're placing the order using a Cento portal, you can opt in or check in for additional research report under the analysis type. So this is a brief of how positive research finding is reported in our in the report that we provide for whole genome sequencing at Centogene. So as you can see that we generally provide a brief clinical picture of the patient, followed by negative or positive diagnostic result or the main finding result, and under which if there's a positive research finding, we highlight that in red, and then followed by a variant interpretation, which means a gene and its associated condition, and also followed by personalized recommendation. In the following page, you can have more details on the variant, all its in silico parameters and allelic frequency, and also any published literature-based evidence, and the condition or the phenotype-genotype correlation in brief could be looked at in the page 2 of the whole genome sequencing report if there's a positive research finding. So now we move on to the summary of whole genome sequencing or today's webinar, what we have learned, and a concluding factor of what we have already looked at. So as we all know that what is covered in a whole genome sequencing is anything from intronic variants, exonic variant, or variants in regulatory region, anything from a single nucleotide variant, copy number variations, translocations or chromosomal rearrangements could be picked up using whole genome sequencing. And definitely whole genome sequencing outperforms whole exome sequencing, as the coverage is much more than a whole exome sequencing, as non-coding regions are also well covered using a whole genome sequencing. And definitely the other fact is that since there's no PCR enrichment step, or no PCR amplification is required for whole genome sequencing, there would be much lesser artifacts compared to whole exome sequencing or other genetic diagnostic tools. So this was a study that we have done in-house at Centogene. So this study was held at Centogene in 2000. This was published in 2020 on around 1,007 consecutive individuals for whom whole genome sequencing was performed, and the data was analyzed from their genetic data set. So what we could identify here is that out of this 1,007 individuals, around 83% of the individuals have previously underwent a any form of genetic testing, which could be whole exome sequencing or any other form like microarray or common genetic diagnostic tools. So here about 36% of the individuals from this lot have underwent previously whole exome sequencing and turned out to be negative, and then they have their referring physicians have ordered a centogenome for them. And the centogenome, when we looked at the centogenome results of all these patients of negative genetic result in whole exome sequencing, which is around 358 individuals who have previously performed whole exome sequencing and was turned out to be negative, when we performed a centogenome for them, we could identify that around 30% of the individual had additional genetic diagnosis, which is a clinically relevant variant was identified in around 30% of these individuals. which was anything from likely pathogenic, and variant of uncertain significance. And also the other genetic testing that was offered or was performed in these group was around 16% of the individuals previously performed a microarray, or and 8% of the individuals previously had underwent various NGS panel or NGS testing, NGS targeted testing, and around 23% of the individual have underwent different genetic testing such as karyotyping, Fragile X syndrome testing, and common testing such as MLPA or other repeat expansion analysis, which is performed. So the fact that we could see is that uh, all these individuals have taken or moved along a long path, like we have discussed in the first few slides, that the genetic diagnosis for these patients were not a simple or a straight line. It took around over the years. It was noted that around the patient waited around 5 years before they actually had a genetic diagnosis, and they could move ahead and look for any treatment strategies for them. So this is just a small representation of how various tests that we offer to our patient and how it looks like in the form of puzzle. So as we all know that when we have a rare disorder patient, when we have a patient where we suspect a rare disorder, uh, in the initial step everything looks like a jigsaw puzzle to us. Everything is scattered. The puzzles has to be more or less put into place so that we have a complete information and then we know what we are looking into. So same goes with the clinical picture as well as the test that we order. So generally what happens is, uh, most of the time we order different tests, like how we do a trial and error, because we have bits and pieces of information. So we order the low end genetic testing, such as the commonly available genetic testing such as chromosomal microarray or clinical exome sequencing or NGS panels, and also single gene genetic testing. But when we find that there's a negative result, or when we find we don't find an answer for these patients, then we move forward to a higher end test such as whole exome sequencing, where we know that the data that we get and the information that we get is more uniform in nature, but yes, with large gaps such as whatever is not covered, such as an intronic or the regulatory region. But definitely yes, Wes would give us a better clarity, because it would mostly roll out a rule in all these single nucleotide variants, insertion deletions, and copy number variations. But when that also turns out to be negative, and that is when we actually look forward or offer whole genome sequencing for our patients, majorly because, as we all know, it is very uniform data. We know that the maximum genetic information is covered at this single step. And also a whole genome sequencing provides an additional 15 to 18% clarification rate or diagnostic rate than whole exome sequencing or any other test. So now that we know that as we achieve more understanding on the deep intronic variants and other non-coding variants, definitely WGS would ultimately be outweighed by its diagnostic superiority. And also with time, we will also overcome the perceived disadvantages of WGS as compared to WES, and as we have it at this present moment, which is majorly the cost and the other disadvantages such as increased requirement for data analysis and the data storage. This is just a small representation of how WGS data looks against the WES data. So as you can see here, it's very clear that there's a uniformity of in terms of coverage, and there's a full intronic coverage and exonic coverage in whole genome sequencing. A complete intragenic and intergenic coverage could be achieved using a whole genome sequencing. And there would be minimal or no enrichment artifacts and less coverage gaps. So now that we know that when to offer a whole genome sequencing and how or what are the advantages of whole genome sequencing, this is a small representation of how the genetic journey of patients with a heterogeneous genetic diagnosis or a atypical clinical picture or a complex clinical picture is. Generally, either the patient take a long route where we go with a number of conventional genetic testing strategies, such as starting with single gene and then moving forward to chromosomal microarray or whole exome sequencing, and then ultimately may or may not be reaching the genetic diagnosis. The downside of this is that the cost would be much higher, the time taken would be much higher, and we do not know in which step do we actually come to the conclusion, or in which step do we actually achieve a genetic diagnosis for this particular patient. Whereas the other way would be that we can directly order whole genome sequencing as the first tier genetic testing for the patient, and we know it that all the information that could be covered using a whole genome using a single gene testing from or to chromosomal microarray can be picked up using whole genome sequencing. So this will definitely cut down the cost and the time and the chances of identifying or getting the final diagnosis for the patient at the much earliest, and also if there is a treatment available that could be provided for the patient at the earliest, than waiting for a couple of years, like 5 or 8 years down the lane. So today we end with our session with that. Now we'll move forward to the Q&A session.
Many thanks, Kriti, for this presentation. Really interesting. And now we will start with the Q&A session. The first question is from Maria, and she's asking, would you recommend a whole genome sequencing solo over whole exome sequencing trio, and why?
So thank you, Maria. That was a very good question. So the testing strategy has to be purely decided based on the clinical picture of the patient. That is the first point that should be taken into consideration. Definitely, yes, whole genome sequencing solo has the maximum advantage over all the other tests that's available as of now. The reason being that we've already discussed that anything from an exonic variant or intronic variant could be picked up or very well covered using a whole genome sequencing. And thus the clinical picture has to be taken into consideration at the first place, and also the need for trio analysis, so the need for a parental segregation analysis also has to be taken into consideration. So the other factor is the time and cost. So definitely whole genome sequencing is preferred over whole exome sequencing, and the best possible test would be a whole genome sequencing trio if that could be possible at that point of time.
Thanks, Kriti. Another question from Nicholas. He's asking, does Centogene have statistical data reflecting the performance of whole genome sequencing in trio design compared to singleton?
So yes, in the recent study that we have done, the paper that we have already discussed, in which we have analyzed the data of around 1,007 consecutive individuals who have whose whole genome sequencing was performed. In that, we could identify that whole genome sequencing trio was having much more advantage than that of a solo, majorly to rule out all the VUSs. Definitely, when you perform a whole genome sequencing trio, the rate of VUS would be significantly can be significantly brought down, majorly because we can do or rule out all the we can rule out the inheritance pattern of the patient, and also if it's a de novo variant that could be classified and identified at that particular or at that same moment, than waiting for additional genetic testing in the parents. This part will be shared using our the recent publication could be shared with you, and then you could go through it for the detailed statistical data.
Okay, another question from David. He's asking, is whole genome sequencing going to replace microarray? Do we need to perform microarray in parallel when we order whole genome sequencing?
Okay. So, well, the answer would be that yes, over the time, definitely whole genome sequencing would be completely replacing the microarray. Reason being that currently we can clearly pick up all the microdeletion duplication could be ruled out using whole genome sequencing, or any large chromosomal rearrangements such as copy number variations can be ruled out using a whole genome sequencing. But if you are currently looking for also to looking for LOH status or uniparental disomy status in your patient, then it is very much recommended that you order a microarray along with whole genome sequencing, as LOH and UPDs cannot be picked up using whole genome at current time or presently. So here we have a question: is Sendo genome able to detect expansion mutation like Fragile X syndromes? So currently, no, we do not look into repeat expansion analysis. That is not under the scope of whole genome sequencing currently. And yeah, so I think that is it for now. And any
So
other questions, we would be happy to answer it later. Yeah.
yes, we are running out of time. The other questions that we get, we will come to you back. And thanks everyone for joining to our case study. For those here that want to watch the webinar again, we will upload the video on demand in our Centogene YouTube channel. Right now, we will launch a poll to receive your feedback about this case study. Also, we would like to mention that for those who are interested, Centogene is hosting on 28th of February a virtual event to raise awareness of Rare Disease Day. Everyone is invited to join. Many thanks and have a nice day.